Hello and welcome to our show. The subject of today's discussion is a tropical fruit known as the mangostin. Although it has been a popular commodity in places like India, Thailand, China and the Philippines, it has been relatively unknown in North American continent. Unknown, that is, until recently. A growing number of health-conscious consumers in the US have been turning to the mangostin, and specifically mangostin juice, to help with a long list of health issues ranging from arthritis and intestinal problems to supporting the cardiovascular and immune systems. And that's just to name a few of the juice's purported properties. An obvious question is, can all this possibly be true? Or is the mangostin just the latest in a long line of so-called natural health fads? Our two guests today will help us answer these and other questions surrounding the mangostin. First, let me introduce Dr. J. Frederick Templeman, who has more than 20 years' experience as a primary care physician. Recently, he has dedicated the bulk of his time to researching the medical effects of mangostin. Dr. Templeman is also the author of The Mangostin, The X Factor, now in its third printing. Joining Dr. Templeman today is noted researcher and medical school professor Dr. David Morton, who has also extensively researched the mangostin and collaborated with Dr. Templeman. Well, welcome, gentlemen.
Oh, it's great to be here, Abby.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, first of all, if I can direct my first question to Dr. Templeman, what piqued your interest about the mangostin?
Well, actually, I became interested in the mangostin through Dr. Morton. I've known him for many years, and Dr. Morton wanted, I believe, to get the impression of a practicing physician with regard to certain articles that he was researching. Now, these were articles from journals of pharmacy, journals of medicine from around the world. And when I started to read those articles, I began to imagine, there are certain things in medicine you just can't fix. I was trained to look after a lot, but there are many, many things that doctors encounter that they just can't fix. And I was reading about things that were in that category, and I was curious. Could I use some of this natural medicine to possibly help my own patients? And that's how I got interested.
Well, Dr. Morton, my next question obviously is to you. How has the mangostin been used in traditional medicine?
Well, the mangostin fruit, Abby, it's about the size of a tangerine. And it has this outside thick pericarp or rind that usually purple in color, and it usually tastes very bitter.
It's awful.
It's horrible, as a matter of fact. It doesn't taste very tasty at all. But the way it gets to claim the queen of fruits is the pulp, is the juicy fruit on the inside. Now, traditionally, the way people in Southeast Asia use this is that during regular day, they'd open up the mangostin fruit, throw out the pericarp, and eat the pulp. But medicinally, when it would be used, if someone in the village was sick, the mangostin fruit would be open and the pulp would be set aside and the pericarp would be taken, ground on a rock, taken the pulp of this pericarp and mix it with water, make a tea or a tincture, and be used internally for conditions like dysentery and diarrhea, or the pericarp would be taken apart and put in a poultice and used externally on the skin for infections and conditions such as psoriasis. And that's been used in that way for centuries until even today.
So it's really in the rind.
Correct.
Dr. Templeman, what do you mean when you call the mangostin the X factor?
Well, as far as optimum health is concerned, diet matters. You have to use wisdom in your diet. Exercise also matters. And then there is the unknown, the X factor. What is it that needs to be added to diet and exercise to guarantee optimum health? Well, the answer is supplements. But which supplements? And after researching the mangostin, taking a look at it and everything else that exists in the supplemental market, seeing the effects in my patients, I've come to the conclusion, that's the argument I make in the book, that the mangostin is this X factor. It's the unknown factor that people have been looking for in order to guarantee optimal health.
Dr. Morton, what makes the fruit so unique?
What sets the mangostin apart is a unique class of chemicals known as xanthones. Xanthones are structurally similar to other chemicals such as a polyphenol or a catechin. And xanthones are restricted in nature to a certain group of plants that grow primarily in areas of Southeast Asia that require certain optimal soil and climate conditions. And the reason why many people have never even heard of xanthones before is because you only find these class of chemicals in these fruits in these restricted areas around the world. Xanthones, even though they're restricted in nature, are biologically active, meaning science has demonstrated anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, and antioxidant properties from these xanthones of plants around the world that can be used in medicine. There's about 200 xanthones in nature, and about 40 are found in the pericarp alone of the mangostin fruit. And that's where they're concentrated. Is
Dr. Morton and I argue about this. I think there's more than 40. But,
well, and because so far, I should say, in literature that's published, there are about 40 xanthones. Right. And so I agree there probably is more, but when it comes to this day, there's 40 published.
Yeah.
I think most people can understand the role of antioxidants in the body, but how would you compare the xanthones in mangostin with more famous antioxidants?
Well, literature, or some of the published scientific data that's coming out in the past couple of decades have shown that the xanthones from the mangostin pericarp, primarily alpha and gamma mangostin, have been shown to be more potent as antioxidants than many other fruits in Southeast Asia, such as the durian and rambutan. Another article has demonstrated that gamma mangostin, one of the xanthones from the mangostin fruit, is more potent as an antioxidant than vitamin E.
And that's important because the body actually packages molecules of vitamin E in its cholesterol molecules. So that we have something more potent than what the body's chosen is an interesting fact.
Now, Dr. Templeman, you were initially very skeptical about the mangostin. What changed your mind?
Well, I lived in the third world for a number of years, and I think my mind was open to the idea that there were botanical solutions to problems that perhaps, North American medicine didn't have. I had seen cures of cancer, for example, and diabetes that really were quite remarkable, but this was before I was a doctor. And so when I became a doctor, I think my mind closed a little bit as I went through medical school, and I was directed, like most allopathic physicians, to the idea of using drugs for everything. However, I learned about the limitations of drugs early on. And so when I saw what the mangostin could do, I was curious but skeptical because it had so many applications. And I wondered, how, even with the variety of xanthones that are in there, how could it possibly affect so much in the human body? So I moved forward because I don't think that, the idea that it's too good to be true is a reason not to try it. And so I did move forward, and I must admit that my skepticism ebbed as I saw the results across the spectrum of health problems. And so I was convinced. In fact, I had a patient who came in to see me. I was practicing in southern Georgia. And this gentleman came in to see me, and he was in bad shape. He hadn't been able to speak properly for about 3 days. He'd had difficulty getting in fluids, and he hadn't been able to eat at all. And when I examined him and looked inside his mouth, it was so red that you would have believed that some caustic chemical had been in there, or a blowtorch. And I examined him, but I could not figure out what was wrong with him. I called my partner in, who examined him with me, and had no other ideas than I had. I then sent him post-haste to a hospital to see a specialist, an ear, nose, and throat specialist, who, using fiber optic tools, was able to look down his trachea, his breathing tube, and his esophagus, his swallowing tube, and called me and told me that that inflammation I could see in his mouth continued down as far as he was able to see with his fiber optic tools. So we did not know what was going on. The doctor up there proposed a number of tests, and this fellow, Billy, refused the tests. He actually came back to my office, and I had had a chance to consult with the specialist. In fact, I'd even consulted over the phone with a second specialist, and we decided to treat him with prednisone, which is perhaps the strongest anti-inflammatory drug that doctors will normally use. And we gave him the prednisone, but after 3 days, he was actually worse. He would not come back into my office, but I did see him at the back of my clinic, and I told him at that time when he refused to take any other medication, I said, you know, Billy, I have an herbal preparation here. I called it jungle juice because I didn't know what it was at the time, but I gave it to him and I said, swish it around in your mouth 3 times a day, hold it, and then swallow, because it has been shown to have anti-inflammatory properties. Now, I did not know what to expect, but in a couple of days I was really worried about Billy, and I called his family, and they said to me, oh, he's back at work. So I brought him back in, and when I examined him again and was able to look at his mouth, even though there had been some changes in his hands and in his feet, his mouth was completely clear. The inflammation that we had not been able to change using the most potent medication we had on hand was gone. And I thought, that's a pretty good example of nature outstripping science.
Dr. Templeman, that was just a remarkable account, it really was. But Dr. Morton, I have to ask you, can one fruit just be a cure-all?
No. Abby, I don't believe any fruit or herb or drug can be considered a cure-all. There's no such thing as a silver bullet when it comes to medicine. But in saying that, the mangosteen fruit has been used for numerous types of health conditions in Southeast Asia, and centuries of experience and use for health conditions cannot be wrong. Plus, I like what Dr. Templeman said, and that is science is now just catching up with what people have already known. So for the past few years, I keep collecting journal article upon journal article that has demonstrated and has really demonstrated how the mangosteen fruit can work in inflammation in Billy's case, or as an antibacterial agent, or an antiviral agent, or an antioxidant agent. And so even though I don't believe science has all of the answers, the one thing science can do is to help provide evidence about why in this case, the mangosteen fruit has been used and is continued to be used as an anti-inflammatory or an antibacterial agent. And science is showing that, yes, it does do that, and this is how the mangosteen is doing that. So even though there's no such thing as a cure-all, there's a lot to back up the mangosteen fruit in the properties that it does have.
It has many, many applications.
Well, could you name 3 or 4 of the most important beneficial aspects of the mangosteen?
Some of the papers have demonstrated antibacterial properties and helping to combat, and then I should mention this too, Abby, these are done in vitro in a petri dish for H. pylori, salmonella, Staphylococcus, Staph aureus, and even up to the mycobacterium bacteria, which is TB. And in vitro has been demonstrated that the xanthones from the pericarp of the mangosteen fruit have been able to kill bacteria completely within a petri dish. And that's very important in dealing with bacteria, because if you have any of the bacteria that survive, you now have bacteria that can then be get a resistance to whatever agent you're using to kill them. And the mangosteen xanthones have killed them completely. Other properties have demonstrated, as I mentioned before, antioxidants are extremely potent in dealing in preventative medicine, which is something that Western medicine does not really deal with that well. How can you prevent health problems like atherosclerosis? And antioxidants have been demonstrated to be very good in combating or preventing atherosclerosis. Mangosteen's fantastic for that. A science article that came out of Australia a few years back demonstrated that in vitro using human blood cell lines. And then I'd say the big one is anti-inflammatory. As Dr. Templeman had mentioned, the xanthones from the mangosteen pericarp had been demonstrated to stop inflammation in animal models and in vitro models, and that has been going over for the past 3 decades. Research continually doing that.
And the xanthones have been compared to the medicines that I can write prescriptions for. And literally, I don't think there's a medicine that I can write a prescription for as an anti-inflammatory that would be more potent than the mangosteen xanthones.
Well, Dr. Templeman, how can it also help, because I believe it can, patients who suffer from arthritis?
Well, David has talked a little bit about the anti-inflammatory effect of this, and arthritis in its beginning stages is certainly heavily based upon inflammation. Not only arthritis, but many other diseases. And when arthritis actually takes control of a joint, and if we were talking about a rheumatoid arthritis, that's where the body has turned against the material of the joint. The immune system of the body has actually mistakenly believed that the material of the joint is foreign tissue, and so it attacks it and it destroys it. And that is a pure inflammatory process. So that when you give the mangostin to people who have these problems, you get wonderful results. I had a golfer, a fellow who had actually earned his living by being a golfer, a golf pro. And he had contracted a particularly aggressive form of rheumatoid arthritis, so much so that in a matter of months he was bedbound with a number of very hot, red and inflamed and painful joints that standard medication was not able to help at all. He eventually got to the point where he was using a very powerful drug that is sometimes used as a chemotherapy agent called methotrexate. But in fact, it's so toxic it can only be used for a short period of time in any individual patient. Now, the methotrexate allowed him to get up and to walk around, and he could in fact golf a little. But he knew that he was coming to a time when the methotrexate could no longer be prescribed to him, and he was desperate. I proposed the use of mangostin, and I was a little bit hesitant because we were putting it up against methotrexate. But interestingly enough, when he dovetailed his use of methotrexate with the mangostin preparation, in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks he was able to reduce his dosage and eventually stop the methotrexate, get out and be more pain-free than he ever had with any medication. So once again, in an arthritic case, and this is probably the most striking one, but I've heard of many stories since and had other patients, the mangostin works better than many medications.
Now, you know, Doctor, some cynics would say, well, that's kind of like the placebo effect.
Well, it is like the placebo effect, but as Dr. Morton was explaining, we have a number of animal studies, particularly when we're examining inflammation. And the placebo effect is very difficult to sort out from an animal study because it isn't the same as human communication, and particularly when you're talking about laboratory rats or guinea pigs. So while there is a possibility of placebo, but I'd point out that a placebo cure is a cure. So we don't need to necessarily go with a fine-toothed comb through every cure. A cure is a cure. And if it's from placebo, I'm not terribly worried as long as the patient is better. But this outstrips placebo. Placebo can be a maximum of 30%. This literally outstrips placebo. Many more people get better with this than could be explained with placebo.
And I'd like to add to that too, Abby, is that even though usually science would go in an in vitro study in a petri dish, and then from that to an animal model in an in vivo study, and then to a human model, that's generally the progression that goes with studying an herb or a medicine. You can't take a guinea pig and have a guinea pig pretend that the inflammation goes away. It just goes away. So even though you can't say because it worked in a guinea pig, it's going to work exactly the same way in a human being, if the inflammation goes away in a guinea pig or a rat, they didn't pretend it or fake it. It happened. Good. And so that happens, even though you can't say placebo effect happened in an animal.
Point well taken. Well, another condition that seems to be on everyone's mind today is cholesterol and heart disease. Most researchers concur that heart disease is responsible for nearly 1/3 of all deaths worldwide. What hope does mangostin offer in the area of heart health? Dr. Templeman, I'm sure you have an answer.
Well, you know, I've seen in conditions like heart failure, I have seen improvements in patients' ability to sort of do things that they have been unable to do thus far because of their disease. And I believe that that is because the mangostin is actually working against inflammation in the failing heart muscle itself and allowing them to have productive exertional duration that they didn't have before without medication. But when you look theoretically at the potential effects of mangosteen, you have the therapeutic effects, and they're kind of sexy. Everybody is interested in seeing a regression of some disease, such as heart disease. But the real important part is over here in prevention. By far, the most important area is prevention. And when we talk about prevention of atherosclerosis, now for our listeners, I'll just let them review with me that atherosclerosis is the buildup of plaque in the artery wall that eventually can cause strokes and heart attacks. And atherosclerosis begins with damage to the LDL molecule. Now, Dr. Morton referred to a study out of the University of Western Australia in combination with a Thai university where they actually studied low-density lipoprotein, this bad cholesterol that gets placed in plaques. And they were able to prove that by adding mangosteen to the mixture, you could protect that LDL protein so that it was not damaged. And without ever being damaged, it can never even get to step 1 on being incorporated into a plaque. So, prevention? Absolutely. It makes sense to believe that if you have that kind of effect upon protecting low-density lipoprotein, that you're going to have an absolute effect in slowing down or in reducing the risk with atherosclerosis.
That's certainly a powerful property. And now I want to turn our attention to infections. We've all heard about the overprescription of antibiotics, and the tide seems to have turned just a little bit in that area. The question I have for Dr. Morton is, how does it fight bacteria?
What science has been able to demonstrate up to this point is that the xanthones and some other molecules known as polysaccharides in the pericarp of the mangosteen fruit have been demonstrated to have an antibacterial property and to be able to kill certain types of bacteria. What science has not been able to demonstrate up to this point is by which mechanism this is done. But as I mentioned previously, the xanthones and these polysaccharides have been demonstrated to stimulate immune cells, cells that are called phagocytes, which means eating cells. These are immune cells that will find bacteria, grab them, and eat them. And so the xanthones and polysaccharides have been demonstrated to stimulate phagocytes and to also cause bacteria to be inhibited, meaning they cannot secrete their toxins and they cannot replicate like they regularly would when they enter inside the body. And as I mentioned before, this includes in a petri dish H. pylori, Staph aureus, Salmonella, and the Mycobacterium.
The Mycobacterium.
Mycobacterium. And so it's definitely shown there's antibacterial properties. Mechanism is still yet to be demonstrated.
Well, everybody hates to hear that C word, the cancer word. It certainly is a terrifying description. Nobody wants to ever hear it, Dr. Templeman, but I know that you believe that the mangosteen can really help in that direction, certainly with tumors.
Well, in fact, what I wrote in the mangosteen, the X factor, was that it was an anti-tumor effect. And here again, we have to go back to the idea that we're working in petri dishes with cultures of human cancer cells. So, taking human cancer cells from breast, from lung, from liver, leukemia, which is of course a blood type of cancer, and I know that there is a research project going on right now with ovarian cancer. Using these cancer cultures, we have incubated them with the xanthones from the mangosteen, and in no instance has there ever been a failure. In other words, the mangosteen has either killed or it has inhibited the growth of all of the cancer cells to which it has been exposed. And in fact, in Taiwan, at the university that studies Chinese medicine and compares it to Occidental medicine, there was a comparison done with regard to stomach cancer, breast cancer, and primary liver cancer, and they compared one of the xanthones from the mangosteen, a substance called garcinone E, to 6 cancer chemotherapy drugs which are standardly used today. And it outperformed 5 of them. Now, that may not impress a lot of people because it's in a petri dish, but I'll tell you, it impressed me, and I think it impressed the cancer cells. So I really do believe that there is reason to be optimistic about this in the use of cancer therapy. However, I would never recommend that anyone stop their standard cancer therapy, whether they're receiving chemotherapy or whether they're having radiation or any other type of cancer therapy, in favor of this. I would suggest that it be added to it, and that when some outcome comes, who cares who got the credit? But I have seen remarkable things happen with regard to cancer when folks have used the mangostin as well as everything else at their disposal.
Doctor, I think you have everybody's attention now.
Yeah, you mentioned that it was a scary word, the C word, the cancer word. I believe the reason why it's so scary is that you could ask any physician and find an oncologist, that's what they do for a living, and ask, what is the cure to cancer?
There is none.
And there is none. And I know oncologists do the best job they can with the drugs that they have, but there is still to this day no cure for cancer. And there is comparing the number of mortality, the mortality rate.
Percentage mortality.
Yeah, percentage mortality rate 30 years ago to 2004, it's about the same.
We're talking about the 4 big killers. We're talking about colon cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, and breast cancer.
And yet you look at something like an herb, what else can there be in nature that can help? And that's why I believe that even though these are done in a petri dish, these studies that Dr. Templeman mentioned have all come out in the past couple of years, published in peer-reviewed journals, and that there are anti-tumor properties to this, and there's still a lot of study to be done. There's a lot of promise in this fruit.
You certainly have a lot of people's attention right now. We've spent the past few minutes discussing really some of the most significant health issues of our time, but we have not exhausted the list of health benefits. Dr. Morton, you've done extensive research on the mangostin. What really just do you sum up as the best benefits of the fruit?
I'd have to say that would be the anti-inflammatory benefits. Studies have been spanning the past 30 years. The first study that was done on the mangostin fruit was done in 1855 by a German scientist who found the first xanthone called alpha mangostin. And since that day, more research has been done, and the majority of it has been done in the anti-inflammatory properties. An interesting thing is that a lot of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, known as NSAIDs, that are used today have some of the side effects, such as gastric ulcers. People who take too much aspirin over a long period of time can get these gastric ulcers. The xanthones from the mangostin fruit have been demonstrated that they have an anti-ulcer property. So not only do they help inhibit inflammation, they also actually help inhibit any type of ulcer, the process that would create an ulcer that many other NSAIDs would create.
So in fact, if I can jump in here, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, the things like ibuprofen, naproxen, and if you're looking
Aspirin.
at prescription drugs, things like Bextra and Celebrex, and up until recently Vioxx, these drugs were responsible for more deaths in North America in the year 2000, than AIDS. So we're not talking about a small effect when we talk about something that can give you anti-inflammatory protection and not expose you to the side effects that are deadly.
Doctors, I'm going to address this question to both of you. There have to be some safety issues with the mangostin.
The first thing I'd like to say, Abby, is that one of the benefits of traditional medicine, medicine that has been used by cultures in various parts around the world, is that they use an herb or a fruit for century upon century, and it's passed down from family to family, that from record to record shows which fruits or herbs are helpful, which herbs or fruits are toxic or have harmful effects, and that there is not one documented case in any research that I've been able to uncover that demonstrates there's any type of adverse or toxic property to the mangostin fruit, the pericarpate seeds.
I slipped on one on a sidewalk when I was in New Zealand, and that's about the closest I've come to seeing damage. Now, people can have allergic reactions to this fruit just like they can to any other kind of fruit, but in the reported reactions, they've been restricted to cutaneous manifestations, nothing that is life-threatening. So it's not that people cannot have adverse reactions, but they aren't life-threatening. They don't fall into the same category as drugs do. And, you know, you just have to wonder, why would you ever use a drug which has the potential for disaster when a mangostin or a fruit or some other edible element that is in nature could possibly give you the same kind of an effect? That's the question I ask over and over.
Right. And my dad used to tell me when I was a little kid growing up to trust in God but tie up your camels. And so if you really want to make sure that things are safe, what we did is direct 2 studies that were toxicity studies done with laboratory rats, megadosing the mangostin fruit in different concentrations to a group of rats over a month. And in macroscopic and microscopic examination of the tissues of the rats, there was nothing that showed any type of pathological manifestation.
The only change in behavior that was noted was that the rats were running out and sharing their mangostin with friends.
Which brings me to the next question. I think everybody's thinking of stockpiling the mangostin right now. Is there a limit to how much we should be taking?
Well, you know, with the rat studies, there were no toxic limits. When you do studies like this, you try and establish some dose at which the animal or the person that you're using with is going to have adverse effects. We didn't ever find that toxic level. So there is no toxic level. However, in minimum dosages, when someone is looking for a therapeutic effect, something's gone wrong with them and they're trying to get that in some way reversed through the assistance of the mangostin, I recommend that because it has a half-life of 4 to 6 hours in the human body. In other words, it remains in the circulation for about 4 to 6 hours before half of it is gone, that it should be dosed 3 times a day. Now, that's uncomfortable to have to take something 3 times a day, but that's the fact. And you would start with at least 1 ounce per dose, 30 ml for those who may be in a different system than we have here. And you could go up from that. There is no upper limit. More may be better. It in fact appears to be that way in very serious conditions such as cancer and major ailments. People take much more than 1 ounce 3 times a day. However, when you're looking for the benefits of prevention, a single ounce a day seems to be all that you need.
Well, gentlemen, I have to thank you for all of your insight and knowledge on the mangostin, and also add, do you have any other comments?
Abby, one of the reasons why I'm very passionate about studying this fruit is that I grew up in a family that was very
herbal gerbil.
Yeah, herbal gerbil, I think is a good word. And I use that affectionately, herbal gerbalish. I took herbal vitamins with my breakfast every day. We had homemade yogurt, a wheat grinder to make our own wheat, to make our own bread. One of the first water purification systems that was the size of a small Volvo that stuck into our front sink. And we had a family, we had grown vegetables and so forth. I grew up taking herbs and never really taking medications. I went off to college, and in going through graduate school, my mind, I kept seeing different things with herbs, and a lot of herbal products and companies on television and in the marketplace just advertising just outrageous claims that an herb could make you lose weight and it can help you grow hair and can make you, the claims were limitless. And I really became a little disenchanted with certain herbal companies. I got very excited about the mangostin fruit because I've always believed herbs work. I still take herbs to this day and supplement. But here's an herbal supplement that science is validating, that science is demonstrating it has anti-inflammatory properties, and because of A, B, and C, and here's the mechanism, and this is how it works, and this is the potential that it has in healthcare in the future. And I was very intrigued and continually impressed with this science research. And if people if people are skeptical of herbs, I say wonderful. That's what you really need to be. There's so much garbage that can come out in the name of complementary or herbal medicine. But I tell them, if you research this and you take a look, you'll see for yourself that the science is valid and that the mangostin really does have a lot of helpful benefits in your health.
Thank you, Dr. Morton. Well, Dr. Templeman, do you have any closing comments?
Well, what I'd say about the mangostin is this. I'm so hot on the mangostin that I think you should be putting it in your shampoo, slathering it on your skin, putting it in your bath water.
You have to be kidding.
Yes, of course. No, I don't say that this is going to replace drugs. I still use drugs. I still write prescriptions. I believe that there is a place for drugs. But we have overused drugs, and they are dangerous. And there is a place for something which can do the same things that drugs can do without the risks of drugs. And that is the place of the mangostin. For me, as a doctor who has to confront conditions for which I may not have an effective treatment based on my studies and on my training, the mangostin offers a real opportunity, safe, efficacious, and I'm enthusiastic about the possibility of it for the future.
Dr. Templeman, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Well, after our discussion today, it's easy to see why Dr. Templeman is predicting that mangostin will be the most successful food supplement ever. We have received both the science and the anecdotal evidence that mangostin provides support for every organ system in the human body. Evidence that is being confirmed almost daily in research laboratories and doctors' offices around the world. As Dr. Templeman asserts, the positive results you receive from mangostin may be so profound as to be difficult for you to currently imagine. It's no wonder then that mangostin may be the fastest growing product in the world of health and wellness. Perhaps it's time you incorporated mangostin into your personal health and wellness strategy. Thank you and good day.